The night Madame was shot, the world around her froze in silence, then shattered in chaos. The sound of gunfire still echoes like a ghost in the minds of those who were there. No one saw the shooter clearly, no one could explain why it happened. And yet everyone whispers the same question: who pulled the trigger? And why did Madame become the target? Madame was not just a name, she was a force. In a world ruled by fear, greed, and shifting loyalties, she built an empire from the ground up. People called her dangerous, but they also called her brilliant. Every move she made was sharp, every word she spoke carried weight. She commanded respect not just because she wanted power, but because she knew how to hold it in her hands without trembling. Many feared her, but many also depended on her. She was the one who could turn enemies into allies, who could silence a room with a single look, and who could stand tall even when storms gathered against her. Her rise wasn't simple. From the beginning, she had to fight against betrayal, against men who thought she could never outsmart them, against rivals who tried to erase her before she even began. But Madame had something they did not: patience and vision. She didn't win her battles in the open. She won them in silence, in the corners of the night, in the shadows where plans were whispered and promises were tested. One by one, she removed obstacles that stood in her way until all that was left was her at the center, and everyone else circling around her like moths drawn to a dangerous flame. But power has a price. The higher she climbed, the more enemies she made. Every alliance she created came with suspicion. Every deal she secured came with risks. Those who served her admired her strength, but in the same breath, they feared her wrath. There were whispers in dark rooms that one day, Madame's iron grip would slip. Some waited for it, some prayed for it, and some plotted for it. She was loved and hated in equal measure, but one truth remained: no one could ignore her. That is why the night of the shooting became more than just an attack. It became a message. It wasn't only about silencing Madame. It was about shaking the ground beneath her empire. The gunfire that struck her didn't just wound her body, it tore through the fragile trust that held her circle together. For if Madame could be brought down, then no one was safe. And that was the beginning of a mystery that has yet to be solved. The night Madame was shot was not a quiet one. The city outside was alive with its usual chaos: cars racing down empty streets, neon lights flickering in broken patterns, and music spilling from clubs where people drowned their worries in smoke and drink. But inside the walls of Madame's chosen place, the mood was different. It was a night of gathering, a night where her closest circle, the men she trusted most, stood by her side. They called themselves loyal, they swore allegiance, and yet, by the time the clock struck past midnight, loyalty would be shattered by bullets. Madame sat at the head of the room, dressed in her usual style, sharp yet untouchable. Around her were the men who owed their positions, their safety, and their power to her. They laughed, they shared drinks, they spoke of victories to come. To the outside eye, it seemed like a celebration, but underneath the laughter, there was tension. Words held double meanings, glances lingered too long, and in the silence between conversations, a sense of unease crept like smoke no one wanted to acknowledge. Then came the moment that changed everything. A sound cut through the room, a single, sharp crack, then another, and another gunfire. At first, no one moved. Time seemed to freeze, and all eyes turned toward Madame. The flash of light, the burst of sound, the sharp sting of panic, these things happened too fast for the mind to catch. Madame fell back in her chair, her glass shattering as it hit the floor. Blood marked her clothes, and the air filled with screams and chaos. Some dove for cover, some ran toward her, and others simply froze. In that instant, the question wasn't just who shot Madame, it was who in that room already knew it was going to happen. The accounts of that night don't match. Some claim the shooter was inside, hidden in plain sight, someone trusted enough to get close. Others swear the shots came from outside, through a window, a shadow watching from the dark. No one has ever been able to agree. Witnesses changed. Their stories, memories blurred. and the truth was swallowed by fear. But there was one certainty. Whoever fired those shots knew exactly where Madame would be, knew exactly when to strike, and wanted not just to wound her but to send a message that no amount of power could shield her. The men around her reacted in different ways. The loyal right-hand man was the first to move, pressing his hands against her wounds, shouting for help. But others hesitated. Some glanced toward the doors as if considering escape. Some stared at each other, suspicion flashing across their faces. In those seconds of chaos, the cracks in Madame's empire became visible. Fear stripped away the mask of loyalty, and ambition showed itself in the eyes of men who had sworn to protect her. The shooting itself lasted less than a minute, but the echoes carried long after. Police were called, but when they arrived, the story was already tangled. No one could agree on who saw what. No one could give a clear description. And strangely, no one seemed willing to talk too much. It was as if an invisible hand pressed down on the entire room, reminding everyone that silence was safer than truth. What made the mystery even darker was how quickly certain details vanished. Security cameras that should have captured the scene suddenly failed. A few guests who were said to have been in the room disappeared before investigators could question them. Even the officers handling the case seemed hesitant, as if they, too, feared what might happen if the truth was uncovered. The shooting of Madame wasn't just an attack, it became a shadow that stretched over the entire city, pulling everyone into a game of silence and suspicion. And so the night ended with Madame carried away, her fate uncertain, her empire shaken. The men who had stood by her side were no longer allies, but suspects. Each one of them had a reason to be questioned. Each one of them had something to gain from her fall. The night that began with laughter ended with blood, and the question that would haunt everyone remained: who fired the shot that brought Madame down? And why did no one dare to speak the truth? When Madame fell, the world around her did not only fall into silence. It cracked open to reveal the men who stood closest to her. They called themselves her protectors, her allies, her inner circle. But after the shooting, their faces told a different story: fear, anger, shock, yes. But behind those emotions lay something colder, something hidden. Something that made everyone watching wonder, were these men truly victims of the night? Or were they actors playing their parts in a plan long in motion? There were 4 names whispered most often when the question of who shot Madame was raised. For men whose loyalty had never been proven, only assumed. For men whose power grew only because Madame allowed it, and for men who now stood in the shadow of her blood. The first was the right-hand man. He had always been at her side, her shield against the world. People said his loyalty was unshakable, that he owed his entire life to her. But power changes men. Being so close to Madame gave him everything: respect, fear, influence. And yet, it also left him trapped in her shadow. What if he wanted more? What if he grew tired of being second, of always standing one step behind? To the world, he looked like a savior that night, rushing to her side, pressing his hands against her wounds. But to those who knew the hunger in his eyes, the question lingered: was he the one who had most to gain if Madame fell? Then there was the charismatic outsider. He had not been with Madame long, but his charm worked like fire. People were drawn to him, women admired him, men respected him, and Madame herself seemed to let him too close, too quickly. Outsiders always bring danger, for they carry secrets not yet known. Who was he really? A friend, an opportunist, or a spy sent by enemies who wanted Madame gone? Some claimed they saw him near the window where the first shot was fired. Others swore he left the room seconds before chaos broke out. In every mystery, there is always one stranger, and in this case, he was the stranger everyone wanted answers from. The third man was known as the silent enforcer. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only in short, sharp words. His loyalty was never questioned, because silence was often mistaken for faith. But silence can also mean secrecy. His past was hidden, his connections unknown, and his heart unreadable. On the night of the shooting, he stood in the shadows, watching, waiting. Did he fail to protect Madame, or did he choose not to? Some said he had debts that Madame refused to clear. Others whispered he had been bought by someone who promised him more than Madame ever could. And when silence hides truth, suspicion grows like a shadow that never leaves. The fourth was the jealous rival, and like the others, his disdain for Madame was not hidden. He respected her power, yes, but he also resented it. He had always believed the empire should have been his, that Madame's throne was stolen, not earned. For years he played the loyal soldier, but behind his eyes lived envy, a quiet storm waiting for the right moment to break. He was the loudest voice after the shooting, shouting for revenge, demanding answers. But sometimes the loudest man in the room is the one trying hardest to cover his own guilt. For men, for suspects, for stories that never matched. Each had the motive, each had the chance, and each left that room carrying a secret. The strange part was not just their possible guilt, but their silence afterward. None of them pushed too hard for the truth to come out. None of them demanded justice beyond what looked good in public. It was as if they all agreed, without speaking, that some questions should never be answered. And so, whispers grew. Was it betrayal from within? A plan born in the circle that Madame trusted most? Or was it someone outside, using one of the Queen's men as a pawn? Every time the story was told, it shifted. One day, the right-hand man looked guilty. Another day, the outsider carried the blame. Another day still, the enforcer's silence seemed louder than words, and always, in the background, the rival smiled like a man who already knew more than he said. But one truth never changed. All the Queen's men stood under suspicion. All of them carried shadows darker than they admitted. And until the truth was revealed, they were not protectors, they were suspects circling the ghost of a woman who trusted them more than she should have. After the smoke cleared and Madame was carried away, the night turned into something more sinister than just a shooting. It became a riddle, wrapped in silence, shaped by fear, and guarded by men who seemed to know far more than they admitted. The world expected the truth to unfold quickly: arrests, trials, justice. But what followed was not clarity. It was confusion, vanishing evidence, and unanswered questions that still linger like ghosts in the dark. The first sign of something unusual was the missing footage. The room where Madame had been shot was supposed to be covered by cameras. Every corner had an eye, every movement recorded. Yet, when investigators demanded the tapes, they were told the system had failed that night. Power outage, technical glitch, corrupted files. 3 different explanations were given, none of them consistent. The timing was too perfect, too clean. A system that never failed before suddenly went dark on the exact night Madame was attacked. Coincidence or deliberate erasure? Then came the disappearing witnesses. There were at least a dozen people in the building, not counting Madame's inner circle, staff, drivers, guests. Some gave their statements shaky and unclear, while others seemed to vanish entirely. One bodyguard who claimed to have seen a shadow near the window left the city the very next morning, never to return. Another guest who swore they heard an argument moments before the shots was found days later, unwilling to speak again. Fear spread like fire, and soon no one wanted to say anything at all. Those who tried were either silenced by threats or lured into silence by money. The investigation itself was strange. Officers arrived late, slower than they should have, and when they did, they acted more like visitors than protectors. Evidence was collected, then lost. Files were opened, then closed. A bullet that should have been the key to solving the case disappeared from the evidence room. The official report spoke in vague words, hiding behind phrases like lack of clarity and inconclusive results. To the public, it looked like incompetence. But to those closer to the truth, it smelled like corruption. Someone, somewhere, wanted this case buried. Rumors spread that powerful figures beyond Madame's circle had a hand in the cover-up. Perhaps rivals with influence in politics, perhaps law enforcement officials who owed Madame favors they now wanted erased. Some whispered about a secret deal, a pact that required Madame's fall. Others pointed fingers at the very men who sat closest to her. If one of them had indeed pulled the trigger, then they also had the reach to ensure no one ever proved it. Power, after all, does not vanish with a gunshot. It shifts, it bends, it hides in new hands. Whispers of money changing hands grew louder. Bank transfers too large to be accidents. Properties suddenly acquired by men with no clear source of wealth. And in the middle of it all, Madame's own empire began to fracture, pieces of it quietly taken over by those who had once served her. The cover-up wasn't just about protecting a shooter. It was about reshaping power, about rewriting who ruled. The game after Madame was gone. The most haunting detail came from a rumor no one dared to speak to loudly, that Madame herself had known something like this was coming. She had hinted to her closest confidants that betrayal was near, that one of the Queen's men might turn against her. But when pressed, she gave no names, no warnings. Some believed she was planning her own countermove, waiting to expose the traitor herself. Others believe she underestimated just how deep the betrayal ran. Whatever the truth, her silence before the shooting became part of the mystery after it. Years have passed, but the conspiracies remain alive. Each one adds a new layer to the puzzle. Was it a rival faction that pulled the strings? Was it her own men protecting themselves? Or was it a network of officials and criminals working together to erase the truth? The cover-up made sure the answer never reached daylight. It ensured that the story of Madame's shooting would remain not a solved case, but an unsolved shadow. And so, the questions remain circling like vultures. Why were the cameras blind? Why did the witnesses vanish? Why did the evidence fade into dust? And most of all, who had the power to silence the truth so completely? Until these questions are answered, the shooting of Madame is not just a crime. It is a conspiracy, a secret guarded by those who benefit most from her absence.